We're live. It is 2:04. Hopefully everyone's doing well. We're going to talk about a really good subject today. In fact, I may be doing a full video on this, only because there's a lot of misconceptions and misinformation being thrown around out there about these subjects. And the subjects are, let's see, the interrelation between cranking compression and power and detonation, and then also dynamic compression, and then also, power and detonation, and you can only have this much, and you got to do this, and there's so many things out there that you get people that are part of one camp. That it's like the LSA guys. Oh, you got to have a tight LSA and everything. No, you don't. That's not accurate. That's not the end all be all for everything. The same thing with dynamic compression, the same thing with cranking compression. So what I want to do is do a video on talking to people about the realities of these things. And I have, as always, lots of data because when we did the big cam shootout on the 5.3, where we ran basically all of the factory cams, and then a number of aftermarket cams. And one of the things that we did when we were doing that is that I did idle vacuum on all of these. I also did cranking compression on all of these. And then now I've gone through and done some dynamic compression on some of these. And also when you're doing, again, like we did last night, what I did was go to the Wallace Racing dynamic compression calculator, and you could just plug in your information. And really the key thing that you need to know, most of the things you can have access to, but you'll need to know some valve events. And then so to cross-reference that, what I did was to get that information, we basically need the intake close. And to know that, you have to put in your cam specs. And the way to get that, if you don't have a cam card, if you just have the normal things, like you have the lift and duration and load separation angle, what you can do is go to your handy dandy cam timing calculator that Summit has, and you go in and plug in that information, and it'll tell you opening and close points. The one thing that you might not have, and you might have to do this more as a rough estimate, because you might not know what advance is ground into the camshaft. And unless you have a cam card, or unless there's an indicator on those events that you have, or on the numbers that you have, like if it's a 111 LSA plus 3, then they could okay, that's advanced 3, and then we could put the advance in there. But if you don't know what that is, we're going to have to take a guess. And the cool thing about the Summit, the cam calculator, and we'll walk through that like I did with the Wallace Racing thing, is I'll go ahead and we'll put those numbers in. And then what you can do is you get the valve events. It tells you the intake opening and close, the exhaust opening and close. You can then take that exhaust close number that you got from Summit, and then take that over and transfer over to your Wallace Racing dynamic compression calculator. And then you can find out what your dynamic compression is. The thing is, once you get that number, what does it tell you? Is if you listen to the dynamic compression disciples, it tells you everything. It tells you how much power you can make, and it tells you how much, what your detonation threshold is, and all of these things. And the reality is, it's just another potentially useful tool, but it's not an absolute. Because what they're trying to do is get something that speculates about the possibility of other things, but they're saying that this is absolute. It's not absolute. That's not the way it works. I wish it was. I was talking to somebody about them talking about engine analyzer software, some other simulation. I'm like, look, that's a good tool, really good for showing trends or whatever. And they're like, yeah, but I did it, and I was able to, finally plug in the right number of variables to duplicate what you got. I said, yeah, but it's a lot easier to have the dyno data and then make the simulator say what the dyno already said. I said, doing it the other way is a lot more difficult. Doing the simulator and then going, that's what will happen, and then having that happen, I said, those are different things. I said, it's very rare that it goes that way. A lot easier to have the answer, just like if you go look at, if you're doing day trading or something, and you already have the trend, you're going like, oh yeah, well, I would have done this. Yeah, that's a lot easier to already see it and then decide what you're going to do. rather than do it beforehand and then watch it happen and have your fingers crossed and hope that that happens. It's the same thing. So the dynamic compression and the cranking compression, we'll separate these and we'll talk about them one at a time. So the cranking compression is an easy thing to get because all it takes is a tool. So you have the motor in your vehicle, or in our case, we have it on the dyno. What we did was, when I ran all of these camshafts, after we did the cam install, before we would run it, or even after we would run it, we did it after, I think, because then the motor was heated up. We would take all the plugs out so that it spins over. We have really good starters on the dyno. We would crank it over, and then there's also this myth about, do you have to be at wide open throttle when you do the cranking compression? No, you don't. That's a myth. You'll get the same number. It might come up a little faster with the throttle all the way open, but it doesn't change the peak number. And then the number of times that you have to crank it, I do 7 or 8 until it stops moving. And then that's what the peak number is. So we did all of that on all of ththese cams. I ran the LM7 and the L33 and the 60 and the LS1, LS2, LS3, all of these camshafts. And so we have data on all of that. So we have we have the idle number, we have the cranking compression on all of them, in addition to having all the power numbers. And then now I've just done calculations on a couple of them on cranking compression. So we can take a look at that. But my question to you, and this will be the poll for today. In fact, I think we may separate this today. Today we'll talk about cranking compression, and then tonight we'll talk about dynamic compression, because there's too much to cover. I don't have enough time. Does higher cranking compression determine we're going to do this another way. Okay. The poll for today will be, does a higher cranking compression equate to a higher power output? So if you have a higher cranking compression, let's say that we were to do 2 camshafts, or we were to do 1 camshaft and swing it around, does that equate to higher power outputs? Does more cranking compression equate to more power? Let me know what you guys think. So in the cranking compression, so I think I ran a dozen cams through this thing. And like I said, we did idle quality. So we ran the LM7 camshaft. And when we did the cranking compression, it had 175 PSI of cranking compression. Oddly enough, it did not have, I would say it was tied with the highest cranking compression for all the factory cams. A lot of them were slightly lower than that. A couple of them were the same. Now, I would have figured that and we'll talk about this tonight, that the calculated cranking compression, when you do your dynamic compression, it gives you a calculated cranking compression of what they think it should be. That number was a lot higher than our actual cranking compression. And this is what I'm talking about when we're talking about the difference between actually testing and then doing it like on a simulator or math. Those don't always equate. And so which one of those is right? And this was my conversation also with the engine simulator guy, that I go by the what actually happens. And then we evaluate what actually happens and go, is that what should have happened? Because that can also show that we made a mistake in the testing, or the timing was off, or the mark was off, or whatever. We can evaluate that too. That's a good way to go back and look at it. But the highest, to answer this question, the motor, or the combination in our case, the camshaft, because nothing else changed on the motor. This was a 5.3, an LM7. So in our case, the highest cranking compression number came with the smallest camshaft. In fact, the highest cranking compression came with the worst cam. It didn't come with the stock camshaft, because the camshaft, one of the camshafts that I put in there, actually had a higher cranking compression number, but it was a reverse pattern cam. It was bigger than the factory cam, but it had more intake than exhaust. It was a 208 intake duration and 200 exhaust. and it had the highest cranking compression. It also was a terrible camshaft. It made more power than stock, but by a little bit, it made about 20 horsepower more than stock and about 10 more foot-pounds of torque. So it made more horsepower and more torque, had higher cranking compression, but was a terrible camshaft. Because when we did it the other way, like we did another camshaft that was a dual pattern going the other way, and it had slightly less cranking compression. It had 182, but it made a lot more power. It made 411 horsepower and 406 foot-pounds of torque. So it made like 30 more horsepower than that, 35 more horsepower, and another 20 foot-pounds of torque. It basically was better everywhere. So when you have the cam timing wrong, you can affect the cranking compression. You can have more cranking compression and more horsepower, but we can also have less cranking compression and more horsepower. So both of those things are possible, which is why I try to tell people, hey, look, when you're talking about cranking compression, it's correlated. It can be correlated to power, but it's not a causal thing. Higher cranking compression doesn't necessarily dictate higher power output. So that's the answer to our poll. So that in case you were wondering, cranking compression alone doesn't dictate power output. Interestingly enough, that camshaft, that reverse split camshaft, also had a very good idle quality. The idle quality was 22 inches or over 22 inches of vacuum, just like the factory LM7 camshaft, which had the highest idle quality besides that one. Everything else was lower than that, but not by a lot. Like as you would expect, all of the factory camshafts had a very good idle quality because that's what's designed into that cam lobe. I mean, that's what they did. The idle quality for an OEM camshaft is a critical element of cam design because people spend more time at idle, and when they would notice a problem would be at idle. The idle is cantankerous or whatever on a stock car. I don't want my Corvette to be like that, or my Camaro, or my station wagon, or whatever it is. So a smooth idle is paramount to that. So not surprisingly, all of the factory ones had very, very good idle. They all seemed to be over 20 inches. The LS9 camshaft was over 20. The LS2 camshaft was 21 and a half. So the LS2 camshaft a little better than the LS9 camshaft. And not surprisingly, the LS9 camshaft made a lot more power, made more power than the LS2 camshaft, and more power than all of the other lesser LSs, LS1, LS2, LS3, LS6. The LS9 camshaft was better than all of those by 10 horsepower or so, but it was also softer down low. Now it did have a pretty decent peak torque number that was the equivalent of really of all of those, of all of the LS2, LS3, LS6 kind of camshafts. They had good torque. And by the way, the LM7 camshaft, the smallest camshaft, the 191, 190 camshaft, did not have the highest peak torque. It had the highest cranking compression, but did not have the highest peak torque number. So again, that's another myth that happens, is that guys think that cranking compression dictates torque output. It doesn't. There's not a correlation there. And I remember having somebody tell me, oh yeah, you degree the cam till you get the highest cranking compression. And there might be some, I'd like to see the dyno test of that, where we degree the cam based on a cranking compression number and then try to get the highest cranking compression and then see what power curve that produces. Because I'm not confident that doing it that way produces the best overall torque curve. I'd like to see if there's a correlation to that cranking number without changing that camshaft to something else. Doing that cranking compression, degreeing the camshaft in, moving it, advancing it, retarding it, whatever you're going to do to where you get the highest cranking compression, does that produce the highest peak torque? Does that produce the highest low speed torque? Does that produce the best average torque? Does that produce the best torque at the top of where the horsepower peak is? What does that do? What is that exact correlation? And I haven't had anybody answer that to me to my satisfaction. And by my satisfaction, what I mean is they're showing me the data that I have here where they ran 10 camshafts and they did that. And here's what happened with the curves when we, or even if they just showed me with one camshaft, here's what happened when we ran it straight up. Here's what happened when we advanced at 2, advanced at 4, advanced at 6. Here's the correlating power curve. Here's the correlating cranking compression number. And now we have all the data. We can go, hey, yeah, there's something there. So we can take a look at this and go, yeah, there is a direct correlation between that. And then also looking at it as a nuance, did the highest cranking compression produce the highest peak torque? Did it produce the highest torque at 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, whatever the number is? Did it produce the best pre-torque peak, torque output? Was it post-torque peak torque output? Whatever it is, whatever the data suggests that we can correlate, what happens there? And I would be interested in that. Maybe that's something that I need to do. And I did not do this. I thought that I gathered all the information that you could possibly gather on this, but apparently that's not the case. But there's a lot of good data there. And I can tell you that the cranking compression does not dictate peak torque, and the cranking, at least in terms of the variations between the different camshafts. But we are having a change in dynamic compression there too. So we're going to talk about that tonight. So let's see what you guys got going on today. That's my spiel. How's our poll? Our poll's kind of split here. Gentlemen, Rob, Knowledge, Jet, Scott, what's going on? I was thinking about startup tuning this morning. On aircraft, we use timing retarders on startup. Timing is otherwise static. We do that on the engine dyno when we have, particularly on carbureted things, very high compression carbureted things that have a locked distributor. So let's say that it's a big block Chevy and it wants to run at, let's pick a number, let's say 38 degrees. So we have 38 degrees of startup with 13, 14, 15 to 1 on a big block with lots of spring pressure because it has, it's got a giant size camshaft in it, which lowers the dynamic compression, which is beneficial. But those things can be cantankerous with startup and you don't want it backfiring and stuff. And so what they do is on the MSD that we have, that the ignition amplifier that we have that runs through the MSD distributor that we would have in that carbureted big block, we have a digital 7 that allows us to put timing retard in it. So on startup, we could put a timing retard in for 4, 8, or 6, 16 degrees, whatever we want. And then, Brule would plug that into the digital 7. And then so for startup, we could retard the timing, and then it just goes back to a lock distributor. And that all works out pretty good. Northern Canada, what's up? Perfect timing. I'm having a snack. It's a myth like narwhals. Good morning, mate. 8:40 a.m. They're in South Australia. I love it when people from Australia and other countries tune in. I think that's awesome. No, narwhals are real. That's right. The unicorns of the sea. Engine builder / stock trader. There you go. Richard, can I make my 6-liter Gen 3 stroke to 468? You can if you sleeve the block. We've done that. And we've done that on aluminum blocks too, not just 6 liters, but we did that on an LS6 block. We made a 468 out of it. Otherwise, no. You don't have enough sleeve length to run lots of stroke, and you don't have enough bore size to do that. I've never seen a narwhal. I've only seen photos and video of them on TV. Smaller cam will generally give you a lower cranking compression. A smaller cam will give you lower cranking compression. It's the opposite. A bigger cam will give you lower cranking compression. That kind of works. I can tell you that that's not a direct thing either, because the 224 cam that I ran had the same cranking compression as the stock camshaft. The 208 cam, the 208-200 cam had more cranking compression. The 210, 218 cam, I think, had more cranking compression than the stock cam. And LS2, which is a bigger cam than the stock LM7 camshaft had more cranking compression. The LS9 had less. So it was all over. Which takes its time, but you'll see your comment. Yeah, I don't answer comments while I'm monologuing. It's only after I go back and read all of them, but I already answered that. can I make a Gen 3 6-liter? Yeah, the one thing you want to be careful of, and I don't look at any of the comments until I'm doing after I'm doing the discussion, the technical discussion. But you want to make sure that you don't ask the same question like 5 or 6 times, because if you do, you won't be here anymore. My Jetta has over 400 psi cranking compression because it's a diesel. I've never done a cranking compression test on a diesel. More torque with higher cranking compression. As cam gets larger in duration, dynamic compression will drop, but power output will go up. Yeah, we're not seeing that. Engines with low cranking compression tend to be duds at low engine RPM. Also, advanced cam timing almost always increases cranking compression and moves torque lower in the RPM range. That's also a myth, that advancing the cam always adds low speed power. That doesn't happen. I mean, the camshaft might already have more than enough advance built into it, and its valve vents might already be advanced. So you don't always add low speed power by advancing the cam. We saw that with the LS9 camshaft. I thought that particular one would definitely want more advance, but it did not. Kind of like nitrous cams that bleed off more cylinder pressure, but still make good power. I think that all bigger cams do that. Increased compression increases horsepower across the board. Increased static compression does that, yeah. Anybody who wants a Corvette and don't want to chop your idle shouldn't have one. Like George Bryce's opinion that since nobody has ever cranked their engine down the track, it doesn't matter. It's just a tool to look at, another thing to look at. How the heck can a Nissan 3.7 produce 2,200 horsepower? The big three better get engineering. I don't think there's any shortage of engineering that has your correlation there. Has nothing to do with that. You claim a compression point equals 3% gain in pump gas, right? A 3% gain in power per point of compression. 3 to 4% is usually the rule of thumb in the normal range. Like I use that from like 8 to 1 to 12 to 1. Beyond that, it doesn't do that. The gain gets less until it gets nothing, until it gets to be nothing. Would a higher cranking compression be considered a parasitic loss due to the engine having to work harder to get to the piston to TDC? There is eventually a trade-off at very high compression. But what most people do is offset that with a camshaft that lowers dynamic compression. So a cranking compression thing, well, that will be lowered too. What is the importance of cranking compression? Can you explain the difference between static, dynamic, and cranking? Yeah, we're going to talk about dynamic compression tonight, but cranking compression is just a number generated by spinning the motor over. That's it. And it's a function of lots of things. It's a function of the static compression. It's a function of the camshaft. It's a function of the valve events. But here's another thing to think of. If we take and do a cranking compression, we spin the motor over 7 times, whatever, and we get a number, we get 150 PSI, and then we squirt oil into there and it makes the ring seal better, and we get a higher cranking compression number. Did we change the power at all? No. So there are things that affect cranking compression that don't have a corresponding effect to power. I think the timing of the valve events related to flow of air in and out of the cylinder would matter more than cranking compression. Yeah, what you're talking about is dynamic compression. With the cheap ECM and LS coils, can I set my timing anywhere with no retard necessary? If you have a EFI, you can make the timing be whatever you want if you can tune that. What do you think about port injection in newer Fords with pump 91 on 12 to 1 compression and boosted applications? I don't know which one are you talking about doing it on a Coyote? I think that'd be a lot more difficult than direct injection, because the direct injection kind of cures the detonation tendency. They might also be able to do that with variable cam timing, because you're gonna change dynamic compression. I'm curious with what fuel you can even take advantage of higher compression, running methanol and nitro higher octane than street fuels, or maybe it matters, I guess, when each has a sweet spot. Yeah, but Frank, if we're talking about going from 8-to-1 to 9-to-1 static compression, that's an easily doable thing. We're not talking about going from 15 to 16. My LQ4 is approximately 10.5 static, never calculated dynamic, 150 psi cranking compression observed. Okay. 160. So that's basically what we did with the LS9 cam. It was 163. It's definitely hard trying to figure out the right camshaft for 8th mile bracket racing on a small block. What I would look at is, first thing I would look at for that is, what is your RPM and gearing? So what is the what RPM band is the motor going to be running in during that? And then also, what is the launch RPM and converter stall, if you have that? I'm assuming it's not a manual trans. And then you have to make the best package that produces the best average power through that range. And that's not that hard. Then once you have that goal, once you know what that is, then you go about achieving that. So could you use an LS7 block to get the big cubes the bloke was after? Do they have longer sleeves? Well, they also have a bigger bore to begin with. So you have a 427 to begin with. An LS7 sleeve is longer, and you can put more stroke in the LS7 block. More cleavage angle. I'm in favor of that. In my opinion, cranking compression is just a diagnostic tool. You compare the cranking compression of all cylinders, see if there's an issue. That is a good way to see and just make sure it gives you an indication that it's a big, broad thing, but it gives you an indication that they're all doing the same thing. And you want that. If the motor's working properly and you don't have a broken ring or piston or whatever, they should all be very, very similar. Getaway, what's going on? Will a blower change cranking compression, or is the engine spinning too slow? The blowers shouldn't add any. It's not going to add any pressure because you're not spinning the motor fast enough for the blower to be producing any boost. It may be more of a restriction than than adding it to it. The cam, my Pro Charge small block is a 274, 286 at 50. Yeah, that's a big camshaft. So yeah, the crank compression would be low on that. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. That's right. Is the 706 head really the baby 243? Kind of 706 flow the same as a 243? You can make if you port it, you can make a 706 flow 70 or 80 CFM more than a stock 243. So you can flow it. I mean, we've run ones that flow, I don't know, 325 or so, 325 or 330. But when you do the 706 like that, you make the chamber bigger, you make the valves bigger, you make the port bigger, not as big as a ported 243 does, but you can make it do really well. And a 706 head on a 4.8 or 5.3, I would argue, is a better choice anyways. What's next for the 4.3? I don't know. North Wales, Neil's in the house. I'm here with the high compression 6.2 with 706 heads and a 220 cam. Okay. It'd be interesting to see what that is. I still bet it's in this range though, because it's a 220 cam. So 224 was 170. Well, it might be higher than that. It might be higher than these, because we did it, and that's that's not a big split either. So the cranking compression is going to be higher on that camshaft, and a 115 is not going to have very much overlap. Of a 6-liter LY6 with a flat top 10-1, if I take 30 thousandths off the rec port heads, will a 69-11 comp cam clear? Yes. But I would measure it to make sure. I did say almost always. Also, advancing retarding the cam timing absolutely has an effect on where torque is produced. It is the reason we have variable cam. Would you argue that 706 862 head is better on a 4.8 than 243 799? Yes, I would. Only because the testing, I wouldn't argue that. I would just show people the data of the testing that I did where it did exactly that. The chamber is smaller, so compression is what all the 243 guys would whine about. But the chamber is also sized better for that bore size. The 243 799 head, the chamber overhangs the bore on a 4.8 and a 5.3. And so is it even taking advantage of all of the head flow that the better flowing head has to offer? But then also, particularly I think for a 4.8, I don't think it's even close on a 4.8. I haven't tested that, but on a 5.3 it was better, and on a 6.0 the head was better up to 5,000 RPM. My guess is that as we go down in size, like to a 4.8, I think that the 706's head's better than the 243 head all the way through, like it was on the 5.3. But we have smaller valves, you got a smaller port, and then you have a motor, particularly on a stock one, that can't take advantage of all of the airflow that's available on either one of the heads. Doing an OEM VVT minus MDS on my 6.4 Hemi, that's good. Any affordable way you know of to run a big block Mopar with a standard and 4-wheel drive? I mean, didn't they have 4-wheel drive Mopars? Like in Dodge Ram trucks and stuff, the power wagons and stuff? Matt, what is the same question? The same question as what? I'm not talking about on an LS, but in general, LS more or less overlap by changing just the lobe separation angle on the same small cam, which is way better for low RPM torque. So you're talking about putting a different cam in to make it better, right? Are you talking about a stock one, Matt? The stock 706 head is better than the 241 head that came on a 5.7 LS1. And I would argue that it's better. It's going to be better than a stock 243 on a stock 5.7. Once you start bringing a big cam into play, I think the 243 head might be a little better on the top. But since on a 6-liter, it was on a big cam to 6-liter, it was only better above 5,000. And it was better by about 12 horsepower. What I would expect is if we did the same test on a 5.7, we might not get to where it's better, or if we do, it might be better past the horsepower peak. What compression ratio should I go for on a small block Chevy running stock style pistons? Whatever your octane allows. Matt, a 5.7 with a 7875. I wouldn't worry about cylinder heads in. You have a turbo on it. It doesn't matter what heads you have on it. You could just walk over to the shelf, close your eyes, pick the heads, whatever ones you pick of all of the casting numbers for an LS, as long as you don't pick ones that are too big for a 5.7. Like I'm meaning the valves are too big and that they hit the side of the bore. The rec port heads you can't put on there. But any of the cathedral port stuff will allow you to max out that turbo. So you don't have to worry about head choice. The heads that you have on there, if you have heads on there, are just fine. The reason I'm asking about the 706s being baby 243s is because I have a set of ported heads, but stock valve size. I'm planning on running it on a 5.3 with a flat top piston and a Truck Norris cam. Then you're fine. I don't know what you mean by baby. Since they're better than a 243, if anything, the 243 would be the baby version of the head. The 706 head makes more power than that head does on a 5.3. And if you're running a Truck Norris cam, if I had a 5.3 like I do with the L33 and that had 799 heads on it, I would just run those and I would put the cam in it. If I had a 5.3 that had the 706 heads on it and I was putting a Truck Norris cam or a low buck truck camshaft in, I just run those. I wouldn't ever consider the amount of difference between those two heads on that kind of combination. I wouldn't ever consider changing the head. That if I had both of them, then I might do that, but that's going to be a rare occurrence, I think. The 706 head is the best Chevrolet head ever made. That's not even close to being true. Remember, calculation for compression ratio when under boost equals a theoretical boosted compression ratio, 10-1. Yeah, they give you if you look at a lot of the blower places, they give you this theoretical static or dynamic. I guess it's a dynamic compression thing. I don't agree with that, because I don't agree that the amount of power you can get before detonation on a static compression ratio, like 15-1 or whatever, is anywhere near the same as what you get under boost that they're using to equate that compression ratio with. The detonation threshold is going to be different. The power is certainly going to be way different. The cylinder pressure is going to be different. All of those things are so much different that I think that that's a real false equivalency when they're doing that. Was building a 6-liter for Resto Mod and was going to use K-Tech ported 706 heads with the Truck Norris cam, but got my hands on an LSA supercharger. I don't know what you mean by thoughts. I got 243 heads that came on an engine, so run that turbo. Yeah, whatever you got. Like I said, as soon as you have a turbo on there, I don't, particularly if it's 1,000 horsepower or less, I no longer worry about cylinder heads at that point. .243s are on it now, probably limited by my LS2 intake manifold. You're not if you're putting boost on it, but I was thinking about 9.5-1. That and turbo for any kind of small block for street stuff, particularly an aluminum headed small block, 10-1 is the streetable compression ratio that I recommend. If you go up in camshaft a lot, you can get away with a little more static. If you go down in camshaft, you know, and then you go to an iron head, then sub 10 stuff is probably better. Are 862s decent heads? Yes, they are. They're very good. There's no bad LS head. Are we misquoting you today? Yeah, I'm not a fan of 706 heads. And this is the information or this is what people get from that. Particularly all the 799 243 guys get. A Richard's just a 790 or a Richard's just a 706 guy or an 862 guy. I'm not. If I report what they do on the dyno, that's what I'm a fan of. I'm a fan of data. And so I don't care which one it is. This one does this and this one does this. And when I report that, if one of these was a Ford, one of these is a Chevy, and whichever one won, oh, Richard's that guy. No, he's the guy back here doing the dyno stuff. This is just data and hands. Higher compression equates to better turbo spooling and punchier exhaust note. If it adds low speed power, it helps spool. Other than changing compression and moving the valves closer to the pistons, what are the effects of milling cylinder heads? You just said it. Most people do it for changing the compression, and then you get added power from compression. I mean, there might be a way to, depending on chamber design, to theoretically help unshroud the valve, maybe, which could improve airflow. Airflow research was in the way that they did their valve drop, the way that they designed their chambers. A lot of times their valve would hang out proud of the the head deck. So it'd be below the deck surface, which most of them are like, you see, you look at a combustion chamber, you're like, okay, the valves are sucked up into the combustion chamber. On a lot of the airflow research stuff, it's not, which helps them get really good like valve flow numbers, because there's no adjacent wall in the way of that, at least on that edge. Other than changing compression, okay, we did that. What are the pros and cons of changing the angle that the head sit on the block? Well, changing the valve angle can change airflow. And sometimes if you angle mill the heads, you can get more of a change in static compression than straight milling. 862s or 706s. Yeah, they're the same head with a different casting process. The best heads ever made would be 706 ported with a 216 rec port valve. Good luck fitting that valve in there. Every head is a turbo head. That's right. I'm running a 10-to-1 small block with aluminum heads. I have no problem. I can run 89 heavy loads and run 93. 706 hater. You made the statement to start controversy a year ago. You mean, I think you mean I provided data, but it was much more than a year ago. We trust you because you respect the 302 Ford and the LS simultaneously, and the Geo Metro and the Chevy Sprint and the Nash Metropolitan and the RB25 and 26 and RB20 and the 2J and the Ameribara and the Barra, because it rhymes. 408 Truck Norris 862 home ported and the hated short sheet metal. The sheet metal intake may be helping you for your detonation level on that. Well, people, do you see the doggy asleep over here? Wait, over here. Dang mirror image thing. What people don't get is when you're searching for data, there's no favorite until you're building an engine, do something, build a tow truck, 706 heads. Have you had the opportunity to do any dyno testing with high speed in-cylinder pressure data? No, but Brian Tooley has that now. And so I've talked to him about some of his data, and it's fascinating. So I'm going to try to get more of that. Getting AFR heads and pistons. Oh, good. That then you'll be a winner then. Building a race car, different heads and cams. Richard, in the old days, a 5-liter Mustang with a Vortec, what kind of boost and compression did you run, and what was learned since that time? On my motor, I put in lower compression pistons, wishing that I wouldn't have done that. But I did that because the pistons were free, and Kip from Turbo got those for me. They were Wiseco pistons. And we put those in, and I want to say that they were, I'm sure that they were like 8.5 and maybe even less than that. I don't remember what the dish was. And we put aluminum heads on it, which we put the trick flow, trick flow, not a twisted wedge, the high port heads. Back there, they were called something else. They were TFS KPI heads that we had, but they were that's what they were. And so I could have run a lot more static compression. And then we were running, I was only running usually about 7 pounds with the Vortec on it. We had turned it up. I put an R trim on it, and we had turned the B trim up and stuff because it ran an A trim for a long time. So the thing that I would do differently is I'd have more static compression. And also I would have tuning for it, because back then we were doing pro M meters and bigger injectors and boost retard stuff. And so, we could make it work, but with real tuning, it would be so much better. Also, does a bigger cam make less exhaust sound at idle? The Fox is quieter now. A bigger cam should have a different exhaust note. It should be camier. The Honda K gets respect. Yeah, I don't think you're going to find a better 4-cylinder than that. I think you're questioning my memory. Well, all I have to do is look at, so we can see when was this data generated. Test description. This was 12/19/2012. So that was more than a year ago. It was a long time ago. But that was the cam test. That was not the head test. Best cam combo for a 6-liter with 317 heads. So the best there, you're not seeing it, Carl, because you didn't put it in, but I put it in, and other guys now here put it in. There are quotes on either side of that word best. And that's because we don't know what your definition of best is. Does best mean best idle quality, like stock cam? Does it mean stock converter? Does it mean best low speed torque? Does it mean best peak torque? Does it mean best peak horsepower? What are you trying to achieve? Oh, we got another best question. so just circulate all that in for your cylinder head question too. What is the best aftermarket small bore LS head? I only know of one, but ported stock 706 or 862 heads by various people. Like we've used the Total Engine Airflow stuff. I used it way back when Brian owned it, but we've used other stuff since. That's a really good choice. So is the TrickFlow 205. And there might be others that I haven't tested that have come out recently. What are some of the things that cause sine waves on the dyno graph? It's not the dyno, it's the motor. And on the 4.6 stuff, it's the intake manifold. From the Weingartner shootout, we know that cam cards are not a great source of accurate information. I guess I don't know which ones they're talking about. I haven't had I've only tested 2 or 3 cams. We've only degreed 2 or 3 of them, and they were right on what the cam card said. So I haven't had an issue with that. What would be the result of VTEC lobe on the same lift of the regular lobe, but more duration with lifts starting before and ending after the regular lobe? I'm not sure I understand what your question is. Are you asking if we put more lift on the primary lobe without changing the duration? So let me know. So talk to me about that. So talk to me about what you want to do. Forget about the VTEC lobe. What do you want to do? What question are you asking about the primary lobe? Are you wanting more lift? Are you wanting more duration? What are you wanting to do? And by the way, all of that's been done on aftermarket camshafts. Rovers in the house. Could be valve train harmonics or manifold. Yeah, it's not valve train. It was definitely the intake manifold. We know because I adjusted intake and we shifted the sine wave. So we know that did that. 408 LS mounted to a 700 R4 in a S10. Cranking compression equals static compression? No. Static compression is one of the things that help determine cranking compression. I'm scrolling. Scott, the answer to everything is an 88 millimeter turbo? I don't know what you mean by thoughts. Anybody that's ask a thought question. The 5-liter was 10-1, 12 pounds, Vortec with AFM. Didn't last long after the T-trim. What's an AFM? Is that an FMU you mean? I have a Holley high ram. I made some mods to allow it to fit. I have to wonder if I should have used an LS3 intake manifold. I started the fab on the supercharger for the Sentra. Nice. Yes, Camier, that's a word. You know who Cami is, right? It's that. It's more of that. Wish I could fit a 671 and just cut the hood. The LY6 board would be there. Any advantage of putting a bigger throttle body on there? It's a bigger motor. Are you building a stroker for the LS6? And what intake manifold do you have? The throttle body should match the inlet size of the throttle body should match the inlet size of the intake manifold. Settles. I don't know what you mean by thoughts. I don't answer thoughts questions, so you got to just tell me what kind of question you're trying to ask there. Comp Cam's 459, Trailblazer or a Fast on a 6-liter is a hot setup. Yeah, I think that there are much better cams available than that. Best is like asking what's the best CAE? What is CAE? Should that say cake? I hope it's cake. Heck, for anyone just looking for sound, just run no mufflers. All right. Have a Gen 3 5.3 running boost. Have gap piston rings. Do you think that the stock piston rods will hold the 20 pounds? If you look at all the big bang stuff, it will hold way more than that. If you have the tune right and you don't have some sort of problem like head gaskets or head studs or whatever, detonation's the biggest thing. But the stock pistons and rods will go to 1,500 horsepower. So are we there yet? Cammy from Street Fighter, that would be good, right? AFM is DoD active fuel management. It's got 3.5-inch exhaust all the way. That's a lot of exhaust. I have a 96 Cobra. Reason I ask about the sine waves, are there any intakes that offer a flatter curve? Yes, factory ones often do that. If you take a look at the things that I've done on, I have some 96 intake manifolds that I've tested too up there. Did Sullivan have an intake for that 96? I can't remember if they had that split port stuff. Are there any calculations out there that help you determine how many RPM you have to spin an engine naturally aspirated to utilize all of the available head flow? I don't think that those two are directly related. I think what you would have to do for that is, and I think that this would be interesting, is to go look at some high horsepower stuff. And by that, I mean high specific output stuff that's more than 2 horsepower per cubic inch, let's say. And do this. I would do it on a horsepower per cubic inch thing. The other side thing that I'd like to see is a horsepower per airflow thing. So if we have a 300 CFM head and we made we made 600 horsepower with a 300 CFM head, what RPM did we have to do that at? That would be one thing. And then also this specific output. So guys that are making more than 2 horsepower per cubic inch, and you could go beyond that. What RPM did that take? And then what RPM did 1.8 or 1.6, more realistic ones? What RPM did it take? And just take a cross section of all of these things where you had accurate data. Because I get guys I made 786 horsepower from a 6-liter all the time, all day. I'm like, no, you didn't. Or you probably didn't. Unless that guy was, a guy, a real guy. Iron-headed Chrysler 400, 11.5 to 1 compression. Can it run on pump gas with the right cam? If you put a big enough camshaft in it, yeah. Guys have run naturally aspirated big blocks that have made 1,000 horsepower on pump gas. And they're very high compression, but they also have lots and lots of camshaft in them. Near. Question my L706 comment on my 469 cam comment. You're getting nothing but love. Thinking about milling some 862s and switching to E85 with different injectors for more power and cheaper gas than premium. What problems will I run into? Well, are you wanting to switch to cheaper gas to get better fuel mileage? Because then you're talking about a different situation. You're talking about cruise mileage. If you're just romping on it all the time and want to enjoy it and make more compression and make more power with the 85, yes, the answer to that is yes. But if you're doing it for fuel mileage and you actually went and calculated all that, you're not going to get better mileage with E85, even though it's cost less. You're going to spend more doing that, but you're going to enjoy it more too. So there's a cost on that. Wish I would have got ARP bolts instead of studs. Say the difference for pizza. Did they ever make 2-stroke race cars? I'm sure they did. Is Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, or the Streets of Rage the better series? I'm not familiar with Streets of Rage. I'm gonna have to look that up. Two strokes in Europe. The LY6 has the truck intake manifold on it, equal to the LS3. If I port match 102 mil throttle body, is that going to make any difference? No, because just port matching it doesn't change the flow rate of the rest of that port. Because if you look at that inside of that intake manifold and see how far in it's 90 millimeters or less, and then go, oh yeah, if I just make a funnel out at the end and put this big thing on there, is it going to change the flow rate of the rest of the manifold? Maybe not. I have a 302, the 274 cam. Okay, you're in the right place. It's perfect for my combo. Stepping up to a 363 with the 274 would be similar power range. No, it's going to make power at a lower engine speed. Should I step up to the 263 to make it more similar? Well, Joe, take a look. I have videos up. Hello. Oh, you doing a big stretch there, huh? You doing a big stretch? I know you're sleepy today, huh? You are. What? Hello, Brady. That's Brady. Oh, baby. You do look sleepy. I know. Snorty too. So take a look at all the videos I have up. We've run those with single planes and dual planes and all that, and you can kind of see that 260 or 236 cam on a 363 would be better in terms of street manners for drivability than it is on a 302 or a 347, but it's still a pretty good size cam. I missed the answer about the hot side. What was, I don't remember what the hot side question was. AFM Anderson Ford Motorsport power pipe. Man, I had my phone on. Oh, okay, the power pipe. If you really want to tie it down, you want to know the leak down number 2 cranking pressure is related to the cam and the static compression. Close both valves at bottom dead center equals the highest. Why is a measurement with piston at bottom dead center important? There's going to be no pressure there. If you have the intake manifold right, there could still be cylinder filling down there. But, and I would agree that a cranking compression number doesn't tell you the same thing that a leak down number does, but we don't do that with the piston down at the bottom. Did BTR make their own in-cylinder data acquisition, or did they go with something? I'm sure that they bought it. I don't think that they made their own. But I don't know if it's AVL or not. Austin, these guys are telling you to wire in a flex fuel sensor, which I like that idea. I need 6.4 Hemi testing. I agree. Have you ever tested any cam motion ground camshafts? Yeah, quite a few of them. 3 more videos and I will be a certified YouTube mechanic. So choose wisely. E85 is supposed to be 100 to 105. Yeah, it's at least that much, I would argue. Would you use either one of your cams on your website in a bracket motor? Neither one of the cams that I have are race cams. So if this is a race car that you're running at high RPM and you're doing a max effort kind of thing, whether it's, I don't know what size the motor is, but neither one of those cams would be that. If I was doing a turbo motor for I don't know if I'd do it as a bracket racer, but if I was doing a no prep thing or something like that, they might be an option. They're both small cams. You have a 212 and a 219 cam. A guy that's building especially an all motor thing is going to be 20, 30, 40 degrees more duration than that. What size turbo is too small for a 4.3 liter V6 twin turbo setup? Does rear axle back replacement of the turbos need more to push up front? No, as always on this channel, you've been here before. Choose the turbo size for your desired power output. So how much power do you want to make? And then pick them accordingly. At Valero and Round Rock, I always seem to end up 68 to 70%. I don't think that it matters for most people. I don't think that percentage for E85 even matters. On the J series, one can only go so big on the loads before running into journal bearings during install on spark plug tubes, rocker ratio, and reducing the backside of the cam lobe. Yeah, I've gone through that a little bit with Jimmy, and he's shown me what the guys were doing, and the things that they had to modify to get bigger cams in and stuff. And that's not unusual for overhead cam stuff to run into issues with, things that are adjacent to that area. And so sometimes that can limit, and then also sometimes the valve length relative to, how much valve travel do you have? How much valve drop do you have before you run into retainer to seal clearance problems? There's lots of things that can dictate ultimately, how much real estate you have. Had a call and missing your response. You think it's the hot side making it nose over at 5,400. What is your, I don't know what your question is. Yeah, that was, that's Brady. Bruno might come up. What causes the first fail in a 5-liter 6,900 or 24 pounds? I don't know. Are you talking about one of my videos or some other video? I'm building another engine, 5-liter flat tops. If I use 28 gaskets, is the piston going to hit the head? You have to measure that and determine whether or not that's going to happen. How far is the piston out? And don't tell me it's stock, because there's a big variation in stock. So you have to measure that. You have to use a bridge, and you have to see how far the piston is out of the hole. And then do you have 28 thousandths or 30 thousandths because the piston's down in the hole? Do you have 28 thousandths piston to head clearance because it's at zero deck? Do you have 15 thousandths because it's 13 out of the hole? You got to determine that and see whether that's safe. I myself wouldn't run a 28 thousandths gasket because I wouldn't be ever trying to get that kind of compression doing it that way. But I would measure it to find out. With a 3582 on my Riv, do you think the hot side is white noses over at 54 versus 5800 with the blower? I don't know which one you have. And is this on a 3800 motor? Is that what you're talking about? And what intake manifold do you have? Could I overcome power loss from destroking with E85 and higher compression, or would power still be down all or part of the curve? Tell me what displacement change you're talking about. A million wheel horsepower, of course. Kimi said there have been many F1 cars, 2 strokes. Okay. 88 millimeters, about the smallest you can consider. That's what you'd consider your starting for twins. This would be 88s. I feel like we're way off topic, but to answer your question, more cranking compression should give more average power, and less cranking compression should give more peak power, in my experience. Yeah, the data doesn't support that, but does WestTech have a modern Hemi? They ran a 5.7. I call them Gen 4s because they have VVT and they have the variable intake on them. So they have run those before. They don't have any 6.4s that I know of. And they don't have that 5.7 anymore because the guys from Motor Trend, it was their motor. They took it. Richard, LY6 and a daily driver, C10 with a 5-speed, low buck truck or truck plus. Are you willing to trade the power below 5,000 for power above 5,000? That's the whole thing. That's what happens. In a 5-speed, you don't have to worry about stall converter, really. are you going to enjoy, like there's a like a 30 foot-pound difference between the low buck truck and the truck plus down low. So most people don't want that trade, even though the other one makes more power. Most people don't think that that's an acceptable trade. LM7 and S475, 2 years on it. Used you and Matt for most of the research. Yeah, Matt has done a lot of that. Thanks so much for all the facts. 700 wheel horsepower and race gas. That's awesome. And that should be a lot of fun. Have you made flat sheet aluminum intake manifolds as opposed to tubing ones? And if so, did you run boost through them? I did that on once that I can remember on a 5-liter, because we sandwiched an intercooler core between an upper plenum and a lower plenum that were made out of flat sections. And what happened was they cracked because there was so much surface area. The pressure just would, because this is a pretty big, sizable thing. It was probably at least this big. And if you multiply the surface area out and the pressure, it would, the thing would breathe, basically, would move. And so we ended up having to put standoffs in there inside and weld up columns to support it. And then that worked. But that's my only experience. Don't de-stroke anything unless you have to fit it in a certain class. Use what you have. I agree with that sentiment. I don't know why you'd make something smaller unless you have to. Australia, what's going on? Tufts in the house. Displacement change from 346 to 312. 5.3 to 4.8, 85. So, Austin, why are you wanting to go smaller? Does Westech accept donated engine cores? What are you trying to do? They don't want another engine. They don't want any engines unless you're bringing it there as a customer to run it there. My 3800 used to rev and pull with the blower to 5800. Now with the GT 3582, it quits pulling at 5400 using the blower housing, air to water intercooler under it. So is the blower housing hollowed out though? The blower's not in the way? A GT 3582 should make as much or more power as the blower could. And my guess probably would make more than the blower can. And then I would also want to look at your, if you're still using the short manifold, that isn't a problem. I'm hoping that you're not blowing through the blower that's hollowed out, that the blower rotors are not in the way of you trying to get the air past there. The other thing I would look at is your timing curve past that RPM range. And then it's pretty easy to take a back pressure measurement to see, is it a T3, T4 GT3582? If it's a T3, then you could have a back pressure problem. Because I want to reduce piston speed and run the RPM into the 8,000s. Okay. You don't need to do that. You don't need to change the stroke to do that. All of the other longer stroke stuff will go to 8,000. But if you are dead set on doing that, the stroke length and piston speed are not going to determine the RPM potential. It's going to be all valve train to make that happen. But you can do that, and then but you won't get the specific output change from compression or E85 that you will from the displacement. With a large shot of nitrous, 300 to 400 horsepower on 13-to-1 404, should target quench be 45 to 51 or more? I don't think it needs to be 80 or 100. I think it needs to be, let's see, 30,000, 40,000. $10 minus 53 would be 43. Yeah, I think in the low to mid 40s. It's hollow. Okay. Yeah, you shouldn't have a RPM problem. I would look at the other things I just talked about. $438 small block Chevy on advanced engine builders, 102 made over 1,000 horsepower. I think it's 92 or 9300. Yeah, those would be ones that you could look at. You could look at extreme examples like that and see where they are, and then just put asterisks by the fact that, hey, this was a giant head with altered valve angles and all kinds of stuff. And then because all of that stuff will come into play. And I would argue, like for this channel, that's way beyond the realm of consideration. It doesn't even come into play for the stuff that we're talking about. Piston speed and rod ratio and dimpling at 0.7 AR. It's T3. Okay. Yeah, a T3. Are you maxing that thing out? Like, are you making 600 horsepower? Adam, 58cc, 799 heads on LM7 compression ratio. Well, Adam, you should have been here yesterday when we walked through how to go calculate static compression. So you need to go to Wallace Racing compression calculator and put in all your data, and you could see what the change is. On an LM7 and a 58cc, but I'll give you an estimate. It'd be about 3 cc's less than a stock one. So probably, 9.7 or 9.8 to 1. So it would not overcome the loss in displacement by increasing the compression ratio. It depends on what you're increasing it from and what you're increasing it to. So I don't know what change you're talking about making. I don't know what the compression ratio was on your starting motor versus what the compression ratio change is on your smaller motor. So if you started out at 6-to-1 on your big motor and you're making it 12-to-1 on your smaller motor, that can be a big change. But if it's in the realm of, reasonable amounts, if you want to do the calculation yourself, it's about 3 or 4% per 1 full point of compression. So you can calculate wherever your starting point was and whatever your ending point was to see how much the change is. And then you can use your specific output of your starting motor and go, okay, I was making 1.4 horsepower per cubic inch. And then now, and with my new displacement, I'll keep that same specific output and I drop this much power. And then now with the compression, I added this much power, and you can figure all that out. Pulls hard way more than the blower, 24 degrees of timing. That should be enough timing under boost, I would think. Will the low buck truck cam work with a 78 millimeter throttle body? The low buck truck cam doesn't care about throttle body size. No camshaft does. Most likely 3,900 pounds going 1070s, needs 600 to get there. What boost are you running? Did you tell me, William? And this would be a good indicator. Do you have a falling boost curve at RPM? And when you're telling me that it's running out at 5,400, is it because that's what you feel? Do you have a dyno curve that shows that? Or do you have a falling boost curve? If you have a falling boost curve, which is typically what happens when you're running out of turbo. The reason I'm concerned with piston speed is that no OEM runs an excessively high piston speed, and neither does Formula One. My starting point is a factory LS1 or L33. You're worried about something that you don't need to be worried about. Your piston speed calculation is all but irrelevant. We've run stock junkyard motors to 8,000 RPM, stock 5.3s with all of the stroke. So you can do that, and they don't come apart because of piston speed. They will only get there if you put the right cam lobe design that's stable and valve spring combination on there. But it's not the thing that you're worried about is not really a thing. It's the thing that you would worry about way after lots of other stuff. If you look at the piston speeds that guys are going on really big motors, giant ones, these monster motors, these 900 or 1,000 cubic inch motors, and calculate their piston speeds, it's ridiculous. 502 at the tire. Okay, so that's and what did you tell me what the boost was? And did you tell me if it was a falling boost curve? £20 with a 75 shot. Okay, so the 75 shot is the 500 at the tire? Okay. It hangs on at 19 to 20 all the way. Like, are you revving this thing to 6,000 or more? Because I would think that's but it doesn't have a. Does it have a factory cam and just 1.9 rockers? Richard, so I had a guy port my L83 heads. How would I know if he actually ported them and not just cleaned them up? I don't know. You have to flow them. Richard spins the hell out of junkyard dogs and makes amazing power. His junkyard runs are epic. I'm just saying that nobody's picking on you. I don't want you to feel like that's the case. But it's just that the piston speed is not it's not a thing. It's not a thing to consider in the RPM range that we're talking about. If you want to talk about a 10 or 12 or 18,000 RPM Formula One motor, that's a different thing. But if you look at the piston speeds, Formula One piston speeds are not the highest piston speeds by any stretch of the imagination. If you do the calculations on these bigger race motors, they're way higher than that. They have way higher piston speed. And so that's not the thing that you should be worried about. You should be worried about valve train first. Falls off on the dyno like a rock. Do you have stock valve springs on there, William? I don't know what the yes was for, William. I've asked too many questions. If you have stock valve springs, are you getting into valve float? I also would think that, like, 8, do you think that pistons, that OEMs care about piston speed? I don't think that they do, because I don't think that any of their motors are high RPM enough motors. Maybe that twin turbo vet thing, maybe that's a consideration, but a truck motor that's making peak power at 5,200 RPM, I don't think that they care about piston speed. Stock cam 1.9 rockers. Okay. And does it have, did you put valve springs in it? I have a 2012 Chevy Silverado 5.3. The engine has 243 heads. Did the 5.3 come with 243 heads? Yes. And particularly your Gen 4 will come from the factory with 243s or 799s. A lot of the aluminum ones did, and even 4.8s did. How can you tell if you have valve float? You can tell on the dyno if you have valve float. The dyno curve gets really ugly. Going past 5,400 slowed the car on the pass. You have comp 105 springs. I don't know exactly what a 105 spring is, but we use LS6 springs or 26918 B-high springs. I don't know what a comp 105 is. If the torque curve suddenly goes wonky, yeah, the horsepower curve will do what I call a geometric change. It'll be nice arcing over, and then it'll drop around and do a zigzag back and forth and do all kinds of crazy stuff. If you have valve float, that's one of the things I would look at. And particularly with the 1.9 rocker, because my guess is the 1.9 rocker has a different valve float point than the stock rocker does. But if you're running the blower with those and all was working, something else is going on. What's a fuel issue in relation to William's situation? Well, I'm assuming, William, do you have an air fuel meter on this thing when you're running? Like, it's not going lean or anything, or going excessively rich? We've got 1 more minute. Okay, we're going to close out our poll at 57% saying yes. Does a higher cranking compression equate to a higher power output? Yeah, all of the yeses are incorrect. Well, there's Bruno. What are you doing, huh? How are you doing? What are you guys doing, huh? What are you doing, huh? Head dog, mister. Head dog. Oh, big stretch. Big stretch. That means I was just taking a nap, huh? And he just woke up, huh? I just woke up, huh? Hood, Hood. You want to come up? Well, you can come up here. Hello, hello. Hello, mister. That was kind of a big yawn, huh? Running out of fuel. It's a bit stronger than the LS spring. Okay. Yeah, that's why we put the 26918 stuff in there. 1 minute warning. Bruno just said I have to go. It's time to go. I haven't had lunch yet, and Bruno doesn't eat until dinner time. He just laid down. He's good. He's on guard duty. So come back tonight in a few hours, actually. We'll talk about dynamic compression. So we'll do some calculations, excuse me, on the dynamic compression of these various camshafts and see if dynamic compression has an effect on power. And also we'll talk about the effect of dynamic compression on detonation too. And on that note, I'll see you guys all later.